If there's one thing Bridgerton Season 3 has made clear, it's that the people making the show did not want Penelope to have any women friends during her main season.
Previously in my life, my mother tried to marry me off.
Someone, please marry my daughter.
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel I like to talk about entertainment media. By the time you're watching this video, I will probably be out of town or about to go out of town, but if I can get this published before part 2 is released, well then good. I'm not completely inept at being a small part-time channel.
That does it.
As always, donation links for Palestine are in the description box. Stream HIND'S HALL by MACKLEMORE, and if you'd like to get official merchandise for Kehlani's new single, Next to You, the proceeds of that will be divided between sending aid to Palestinian, Congolese, and Sudanese families in collaboration with Operation Olive Branch. If you are new here, hello! Welcome to my corner of the internet. I've been posting coverage of Bridgerton since I got press screeners for season 2, and look how far we've come. I already have a video pre-recorded reviewing episodes 5 and 6 of season 3. It's been scheduled to publish when the embargo lifts, and I don't know if I will have time to make a video covering episodes 7 and 8 until after I get back. For today, though, I wanted to follow up on some of the videos and talking points I've already been posting about in other videos I've published about season 3, and it's also a topic that's often brought up in my comment section, which is the fact that Bridgerton season 3 has done absolutely nothing thus far to include the relationship between Penelope and Lady Danbury that was in the book. I did another video comparing some of the major relationship moments for Colin and Penelope in the book and the show, and similarities or differences in how those moments were done, and given the fact that when I've done polls on my community tab comparing book 4 to season 3, there are always people who vote for the option that they haven't read the book, I decided that I would circle back around and share a couple of the points that I liked of Penelope and Lady Danbury's relationship in the book. If you've read the book, but you are fuzzy on the details, I will be able to refresh your memory, and if you outright just have not read the book, well, then you will get to go through some of the highlights today. One of the first instances we see of Penelope and Lady Danbury's interactions, and moreover the fact that Lady Danbury holds Penelope in high esteem, is when Penelope and Colin are talking to one another at a ball. Lady Danbury calls out to Colin, and he's terrified. "I'll give you 10 pounds if you don't leave my side," Colin blurted out. Penelope choked on air. "Don't be silly, 20. "Done," she said with a smile, not because she particularly needed the money, but rather because it was strangely enjoyable to be extorting it from Colin. "Lady Danbury," she called out, hurrying to the elderly lady's side. "How nice to see you." "Nobody ever thinks it's nice to see me," Lady Danbury said sharply. "Except maybe my nephew, and half the time I'm not even sure about him. But I thank you for lying all the same." Colin said nothing, but she still turned in his direction and swatted his leg with her cane. "Good choice dancing with this one," she said. "I've always liked her. More brains than the rest of her family put together." Penelope opened her mouth to defend at least her younger sister when Lady Danbury barked out, "Ha!" after barely a second's pause, adding, "I noticed neither of you contradicted me." "It is always a delight to see you, Lady Danbury," Colin said, giving her just the sort of smile he might have directed at an opera singer. "Glib, this one is," Lady Danbury said to Penelope. "You'll have to watch out for him." "It is rarely necessary that I do so," Penelope said, "as he is most often out of the country." "See," Lady Danbury crowed again. "I told you she was bright." "You'll notice," Colin said smoothly, "that I did not contradict you." The old lady smiled approvingly. "So you didn't. You're getting smart in your old age, Mr. Bridgerton. It has occasionally been remarked that I possessed a small modicum of intelligence in my youth as well." The important word in that sentence being small, of course. Colin looked at Penelope through narrowed eyes. She appeared to be choking on laughter. "We women must look out for one another," Lady Danbury said to no one in particular, "since it is clear that no one else will do so." Now, the book makes a point of emphasizing how charming Colin is and how easily he can charm people. So, the fact that Lady Danbury is not falling for any of that and she instead holds Penelope in high regard, while Penelope is the one constantly being overlooked and ignored by people in the town, not to mention being poorly treated by everyone in her family except her third sister Felicity, who is a character that does not exist in the show. Yeah, surprise, surprise to any of you who didn't already know that. Book Penelope has 3 sisters, not too. I just love everything about Lady Danbury's energy, her no-nonsense vibe, and the lack of filter that tends to come from getting older. Comedies with women over the age of 40, not even 40, 50, 60, the older the better, are always a good time to me. First Wives Club, Death Becomes Her, Golden Girls, I'm here for all of that energy. And that last line, we women must look out for one another since it is clear that no one else will do so. This is really honing in on the thing I really wish had been present in season 3. If Violet had been working to get Colin and Francesca matched up on the show, I love the idea of Lady Danbury taking it upon herself to help Penelope. Lady Danbury is observant, we know that. I talked about that in my video essay about Kate and Anthony's not so hidden feelings. Lady Danbury was one of the people who could clock that those two were in love, even if they were in denial about that, or at the very least trying to keep those feelings secret. If Lady Danbury is in fact observant, she should be able to see that Portia is not particularly loving or nurturing towards Penelope, so why couldn't Lady Danbury have taken it upon herself to help Penelope out? The entire Marriage Mart premise is sexist, and none of those characters have the class consciousness to burn the system to the ground, so the key to making us as the audience fall more in love with those characters despite their obscene amount of privilege is to focus instead on the love and camaraderie they have for one another, and if we could have seen more of this intergenerational women's solidarity, I would have loved to watch that. Also, I think I just tend to have Whitney Houston's Cinderella on the brain a lot, so I like the idea of Lady Danbury being like that, a sort of fairy godmother who is always impeccably dressed and helping the girls out to get their lives in order. You know, she helped Simon, Kate, and now she could have helped Penelope.
Talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping.
This conversation goes on for longer. Lady Danbury reiterates that she likes Penelope. She calls Colin a dunderhead. Hilarious. And eventually the conversation escalates to where she decides to issue a challenge to the Ton at large, where if anyone can unmask Lady Whistledown, she will give them a prize of £1,000.
$50,000 cash.
Now for another excerpt. "Miss Featherington," Lady D boomed. "You haven't told me who you suspect." "No, Penelope," Colin said, a rather smirky smile on his face. "You haven't." Penelope's first instinct was to mumble something under her breath and hope that Lady Danbury's age had left her hard enough of hearing that she would assume that any lack of understanding was the fault of her own ears and not Penelope's lips. But even without glancing to her side, she could feel Colin's presence, sense his quirky, cocky grin egging her on, and she found herself standing a little straighter with her chin perched just a little higher than usual. He made her more confident, more daring. He made her more herself, or at least the herself she wished she could be. "Actually," Penelope said, looking Lady Danbury almost in the eye, "I think it's you." A collective gasp echoed around them. And for the first time in her life, Penelope Featherington found herself at the very center of attention. Lady Danbury stared at her, her pale blue eyes shrewd and assessing. And then the most amazing thing happened. Her lips began to twitch at the corners. Then they widened until Penelope realized she was not just smiling, but positively grinning. "I like you, Penelope Featherington," Lady Danbury said, tapping her right on the toe with her cane. "I wager half the ballroom is of the same notion, but no one else has the mettle to tell me so." "I really don't either," Penelope admitted, grunting slightly as Colin elbowed her in the ribs. "Obviously," Lady Danbury said with a strange light in her eyes. "You do." Penelope didn't know what to say to this. She looked at Colin, who was smiling at her encouragingly. Then she looked back to Lady Danbury, who looked almost maternal, which had to be the strangest thing of all. Penelope rather doubted that Lady Danbury had given maternal looks to her own children. "Isn't it nice," the older lady said, leaning in so that only Penelope could hear her words, "to discover that we're not exactly what we thought we were?" And then she walked away, leaving Penelope wondering if maybe she wasn't quite what she'd thought she was. Maybe, just maybe, she was something a little bit more. If you watched my previous video that was also about this book, that last part of this quote should ring familiar. Further on into the story, when we reach the hand-cut scene between Colin and Penelope, remember this bit? "I wish I'd known you kept a journal," Penelope said, reapplying pressure to his palm. "Why?" "I'm not sure," she said with a shrug. "It's always interesting to find out that there is more to someone than meets the eye, don't you think?" Interesting to note how that line is sort of a callback to what Lady Danbury said first to Penelope. It further deepens the interconnectivity of the characters in this world, and moreover, this line of "isn't it nice to discover that we're not exactly what we thought we were," that line gets called back to in yet another conversation between Penelope and Lady Danbury at another social gathering. It's during a conversation in which Lady Danbury is sort of able to psychologically profile Lady Whistledown, fairly accurately as a matter of fact, about how she's, I suppose the word would be, tender-hearted. The details aren't overly important, but it has to do with the Smythe Smiths. If I wasn't in a hurry to get this video finished before I go out of town, I might have elaborated on this a bit more, but it's the same conversation where Lady Danbury speculates that Penelope could be Lady Whistledown. Lady Danbury didn't even honor Felicity with a glance. "Let me tell you something," she said. "As if we could stop you," Penelope said so sweetly that it came out like a compliment. And truth be told, it was a compliment. She admired Lady Danbury a great deal. She admired anyone who knew how to speak her mind in public. Lady Danbury chuckled. "There's more to you than meets the eye, Penelope Featherington." And it's actually quite cute because Lady Danbury recalls how Penelope had speculated that Lady Danbury could be Lady Whistledown, and it just feels like we're just a couple of girls out for brunch, having a laugh, except it's Regency, so you don't have brunch with mimosas, you have balls and gatherings where the Smythe Smiths are playing their instruments to varying degrees of capabilities. That's certainly not my idea of a good time, though. I would rather take brunch. Thank you. Brunch with the girls. Give me some plum wine, some sushi, maybe a side of gyutanshio to start things off. That's more so my Japanese version of brunch, but it's a good time nonetheless.
Tip your waitress.
In general, what I find the Penelope story is lacking is female friendship on the show. I can look at my YouTube analytics and see how massively skewed the audience is. Most of you who are watching this, your YouTube accounts are labeled as female. YouTube analytics will show the viewer breakdown as either female, male, or other. Depending on what I'm reviewing, those percentages will shift around. But for Bridgerton topics, it's always predominantly female. Why wouldn't a largely femme audience want to see the girls being friends and having camaraderie and looking out for one another? Now, up until this season, we got a good amount of that for Penelope with her friendship with Eloise, but the people in charge decided to rip up that female friendship and throw it away in the bin. They threw away this book relationship between Penelope and Lady Danbury during the adaptation process, and moreover, they did little to nothing to utilize the rapport between Penelope and Madame de la Croix, even though it would have made so much sense to have those two interacting more in this season, since she's one of the only people who knows that Penelope is Lady Whistledown without currently being in a tiff with Penelope, the way that Eloise is. I didn't read this book for the first time until after I had watched most of season 3, and now after having both of those perspectives, my general stance is that if they weren't going to include Lady Danbury's relationship with Penelope, they 100% needed to have Penelope have some recurring scenes with Madame de la Croix. As it stands now, I just don't think we got enough of Penelope in general. Even the scenes that she has had with Colin thus far in episodes 1 through 4, they have felt too short. I always left those scenes feeling like, well, I would have liked to have stayed there longer. When I think about the other love interests for the Bridgertons, there was always good material outside of the moments with the Bridgerton that they were falling in love with for that season. Simon had some great interactions with Lady Danbury, Anthony, and the Mondriches. Kate had great interactions with Edwina, Lady Danbury, and to a lesser degree, I also liked the exchange she had with Eloise. It was a good exchange, but that wasn't really a recurring part of the story the way that the relationships were that she had with those other women. For show Penelope, she doesn't really get on well with her family. In the book, she has 3 sisters, not 2. The third sister, Felicity, is someone book Penelope has a better relationship with than her mother and her 2 other sisters. But since Felicity does not exist on the show, you could have had Penelope interacting with Eloise, Madame de la Croix, Lady Danbury. All of those women were good options, and they blew up the relationship with Eloise in the season 2 finale, but I think them working through the rift earlier in the season would have been good material. Now, whether or not they make amends in part 2, I'm not allowed to say, but even if they do, that's only 4 episodes to do something interesting with their relationship in the midst of a million other subplots that are happening simultaneously. The next excerpt from the book, Miss Featherington! Miss Featherington! Felicity instantly took a step away. I think she means you, she whispered urgently. Of course she means me, Penelope said, with just a touch of hauteur. I consider Lady Danbury a cherished friend. Felicity's eyes bugged out. You do? Miss Featherington, Lady Danbury said, thumping her cane an inch away from Penelope's foot as soon as she reached her side. Not you, she said to Felicity, even though Felicity had done nothing more than smile politely as the Countess had approached. You, she said to Penelope. Good evening, Lady Danbury, Penelope said, which she considered an admirable number of words under the circumstances. I have been looking for you all evening, Lady D announced. Penelope found that a trifle surprising. You have? Yes. I want to talk with you about that Whistledown woman's last column. Me? Yes, you, Lady Danbury grumbled. I'd be happy to talk with someone else if you could find me a body with more than half a brain. Penelope choked on the beginnings of laughter as she motioned to her companions. I assure you that Lady Bridgerton was furiously shaking her head. She's too busy trying to get that oversized brood of hers married off, Lady Danbury announced. Can't be expected to know how to conduct a decent conversation these days. Penelope stole a frantic glance over at Lady Bridgerton to see if she was upset by the insult. After all, she had been trying to marry off her oversized brood for a decade now. But Lady Bridgerton didn't look the least bit upset. In fact, she appeared to be stifling laughter. Stifling laughter and inching away, taking Hyacinth and Felicity with her. Sneaky little traitors. Ah, well, Penelope shouldn't complain. She'd wanted an escape from the Bridgertons, hadn't she? But she didn't particularly enjoy having Felicity and Hyacinth think they'd somehow pulled one over on her. They're gone now, Lady Danbury cackled. And a good thing it is, too. Those two girls haven't an intelligent thing to say between them. Oh, now that isn't true, Penelope felt compelled to protest. Felicity and Hyacinth are both very bright. I never said they weren't smart, Lady D replied acidly, just that they haven't an intelligent thing to say. But don't worry, she added, giving Penelope a reassuring... Reassuring? Who ever heard of Lady Danbury being reassuring? Pat on the arm. It's not their fault that their conversation is useless. They'll grow out of it. People are like fine wines. If they start off good, they only get better with age. Penelope had actually been glancing slightly to the right of Lady Danbury's face, peering over her shoulder at a man who she thought might be Colin, but wasn't. But this brought her attention right back to where the Countess wanted it. Fine wines? Penelope echoed. And here I thought you weren't listening. No, of course I was listening. Penelope felt her lips tugging into something that wasn't quite a smile. I was just distracted. Looking for that Bridgerton boy, no doubt. Penelope gasped. Oh, don't look so shocked. It's written all over your face. I'm just surprised he hasn't noticed. I imagine he has, Penelope mumbled. Has he? Lady Danbury frowned, the corners of her mouth spilling into long vertical wrinkles on either side of her chin. Doesn't speak well of him that he hasn't done anything about it. Penelope's heart ached. There was something oddly sweet about the old lady's faith in her, as if men like Colin fell in love with women like Penelope on a regular basis. Penelope had had to beg him to kiss her, for heaven's sake. And look how that had ended up. He'd left the house in a fit of temper, and they hadn't spoken for 3 days. Well, don't worry over him, Lady Danbury said quite suddenly. We'll find you someone else. Penelope delicately cleared her throat. Lady Danbury, have you made me your project? The old lady beamed, her smile a bright and glowing streak in her wrinkled face. Of course! I'm surprised it has taken you so long to figure it out. With this excerpt, we again reiterate this sentiment where Lady Danbury seeks Penelope out because she likes her. She thinks she has a brain, she has some sense. I've seen some people claiming that they're not as quick to push this relationship into the show because it hasn't existed thus far, but I don't think it's ever too late to start exploring new relationships on the show between characters that already knew one another or knew of one another. Madame Delacroix didn't always know that Penelope is Lady Whistledown, but now she does. Colin himself hasn't realized fully in prior seasons that Penelope is a catch, but now he does. Penelope has evolved and grown, and there was that one video I saw making the rounds on social media of Nicola explaining how she has changed Penelope's voice each season. The same principle can be applied to relationships. I also am just biased in the sense that I think it's very funny that Lady Danbury in the book is reading Colin for not doing anything sooner to get coupled up with Penelope. So of course I would have enjoyed seeing something like that on the show as well. If Lady Danbury could see how obvious it was that Kate and Anthony were into each other in season 2, why shouldn't that same principle extend to Colin and Penelope as well? For several seconds, Penelope did nothing but stare at her. Lady Danbury, she said carefully, I very much appreciate the gesture and the sentiment, but you must know that I am not your responsibility. Of course I know that, Lady Danbury scoffed. Have no fear. I feel no responsibility to you. If I did, this wouldn't be half so much fun. See what I mean when I say I don't watch Bridgerton for dramatic plots? I just watch it for vibes and banter. If the vibes are good, I will overlook a fair bit on the show. The entire premise, the world, the setting is rich people nonsense that I don't generally tend to care for, but if the vibes are good, I will have a good time. Usually the vibes are between the main couple of the season, but vibes don't have to only be romantic to work for my viewing pleasure. And women uplifting each other, that is always a good vibe for me. Penelope knew she took longer than she should have to reply, but somehow she needed a few seconds to find her voice. I don't think I know how to speak my mind, she finally said, turning to look at Lady Danbury only as she uttered the final words of her sentence. I never know what to say to people. You know what to say to me. You're different. Lady Danbury threw her head back and laughed. If ever there was an understatement. Oh, Penelope, I hope you don't mind if I call you by your given name. If you can speak your mind to me, you can speak it to anyone. Half the grown men in this room run cowering into corners the minute they see me coming. They just don't know you, Penelope said, patting her on the hand. And they don't know you either, Lady Danbury quite pointedly replied. No, Penelope said, a touch of resignation in her voice. They don't. I'd say that it was their loss, but that would be rather cavalier of me, Lady Danbury said. Not to them, but to you. Because as often as I call them all fools, and I do call them fools often, as I'm sure you know, some of them are actually rather decent people, and it's a crime they haven't gotten to know you. Oh, and another extra tidbit beyond Lady Danbury encouraging Penelope to speak her mind. Here's Lady Danbury calling Cressida a bully, Penelope opening up about Cressida bullying her, and sharing how the Bridgertons would always look out for her. I hate Cressida, Penelope muttered. Lady Danbury choked on a bit of laughter. And you say you don't know how to speak your mind. Don't keep me in suspense. Why do you detest her so? Penelope shrugged. She's always behaved quite badly toward me. Lady Danbury nodded knowingly. All bullies have a favorite victim. It's not so bad now, Penelope said, but back when we were both out, when she was still Cressida Cowper, she never could resist the chance to torment me. And people, well, she shook her head. Never mind. No, please, Lady Danbury said. Do go on. Penelope sighed. It's nothing really, just that I've noticed that people don't often rush to another's defense. Cressida was popular, at least with a certain set, and she was rather frightening to the other girls our age. No one dared go against her. Well, almost no one. That got Lady Danbury's attention, and she smiled. Who was your champion, Penelope? Champions, actually, Penelope replied. The Bridgertons always came to my aid. Anthony Bridgerton once gave her the cut direct and took me in to dinner, and her voice rose with remembered excitement. He really shouldn't have done so. It was a formal dinner party, and he was supposed to escort in some Marchioness, I think. She sighed, treasuring the memory. It was lovely. Now, of course, if you want to get the full portrait of what Penelope and Lady Danbury's relationship is in the book and how that relationship fits into the larger story, the best way to do that would, of course, be to go and read or reread the book. But I figured I could give a couple of examples of what Penelope and Lady Danbury have going on together in romancing Mr. Bridgerton and how that dynamic is completely absent in the show. If Lady Danbury could offer wisdom and insight to both Simon and Kate, I don't see why she couldn't have done some of that for Penelope in season 3, particularly when we don't really get to see Lady Danbury interacting with her own children on the show, and Penelope is very much an outsider within her family unit. When you think about what that feels like to members of the Bridgerton audience who might not have close relationships with their own families and have to find that sense of community, support, and found family elsewhere, I think there was a real missed opportunity to not have more of those elements for Penelope during her turn as the main girl of the season. Going into watching season 3, I felt very strongly that I did not have any interest in the idea of them potentially trying to do any type of redemption for Portia. I wholeheartedly reject the notion that you are somehow required to just forgive decades of trauma and mistreatment being done to you just because it was done by your blood relative. Absolutely not. If Penelope's journey is about not only finding her romantic love match, but also her coming into her own as a person, becoming more confident and secure in herself, part of that journey could have been that you get to choose to cut ties with people who have been absolutely horrible to you and build your own circle of people who actually care about your well-being and will make sure that you're doing all right when things get tough. I'm not saying that season 3 is bad, but there were just many storylines I wish had gone in different directions. If I thought season 3 was irredeemable, I wouldn't be revisiting it as often as I am to cover all of these different details of the show's material. At least Nicola Coughlan is a fabulous actress, even if there are so many things about Penelope's stories that I wish had been altered in this or that way, and I wish she had been given more screen time with Colin, as well as with these other characters like Eloise Louise, Madame Delacroix, and sure, why not Lady Danbury while we're talking about this? Nicola Coughlan is a strong enough actress that as long as I'm watching her act as Penelope, season 3 will have been worth covering on my channel.
They are histories of connection, of hope for a better life.